Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond GIS. I'm your host Kurt, and today we're interviewing a colleague of mine, Santosh, from our team here at Orbica. Santosh, first of all, how did you land in this world of GIS and geospatial? What's your journey to get here?
Yeah, hi Kurt. Thank you for inviting me for the podcast. So my journey is kind of interesting. So my background is in kind of mathematics and economics. And while studying economics in university, I kind of fell into this thing called GIS, which was pretty interesting. At that time in the university, GIS was not really that big. It wasn't really kind of part of economics, but I always thought that economics and geography kind of went well together. And that's why I kind of chose to do my master's in economics, and then I kind of discovered GIS and kind of got into that kind of field. And then slowly, when I started working on GIS projects within the university, I kind of understood the power of GIS and how it can be applied to solve a lot of economic problems. And so that's why I kind of started using GIS within my master's thesis and things like that. And after that, I kind of landed a research position in the university doing kind of water research using GIS. And we started studying things like groundwater and the use of groundwater against agriculture, and how agricultural yield is impacted by groundwater, and how groundwater is depleting or recharging at an aquifer level in Texas. So that's kind of in a nutshell of how I got into GIS. So when I was working in the university in the GIS industry or in the GIS field, I was involved everything from collection of data all the way through processing, analyzing it, and then at the end presenting reports, applications, and web services out of those geospatial data sets. And so that's what kind of opened my eyes to how there's such a wide variety of applications of GIS, not just in the data collection world, but also in the development and analytical world. So that's kind of my journey into GIS in a nutshell.
Yeah, really interesting. I think, I like the different background. That mathematic view is quite interesting.
Yep.
Economics. If you reflect on you've talked about GIS and the broader picture of geospatial, but we sort of believe here that it's not just about GIS, it's very complex jargon and specialist tools. How do you sort of piece together GIS to geospatial to sort of the broader domain, which is really geography, digital geography? What does that all how does that mesh together in your head when you're thinking about the sort of problems we solve and help customers go on a journey?
So GIS for me is a very kind of IT term. It stands for Geographic Information Systems, which comes from information systems. So GIS is a subset, I find, of geospatial as a whole. So GIS is just the information systems that allows you to kind of the tools, processes, and people aspect of managing data, geospatial data. But geospatial as a whole for me is the thinking involved of problem solving. So when you're trying to solve a particular problem in the real world, such as maybe, let's say, flood risk, or looking at deforestation, or looking at insurance, or looking at utilities, it's about how do you apply geospatial thinking to solve those problems. And then GIS is one of the components that you might use to solve a geospatial problem. So in my head, the way I kind of put that together is you've got, in GIS, you've kind of essentially have four main categories. So you've got the data management, data collection aspect, where you're involved with looking at data quality, collecting good data, high resolution data, and how do you manage that, which is where you would use GIS for. Then you have this whole world of analytics, where there are a wide variety of tools available, not just within the GIS bucket, so to say, but in the wider geospatial technology world, such as, there are geospatial tools that are now available within other software systems and things like that, like Python and R and things like that. So it's about how do we apply those geospatial tools within geospatial thinking to solve a problem. So that's the analytical world. Then there's this whole world of geospatial application development. So that's the world of kind of cloud and app development, and how do we develop solutions and applications for end users to use the GIS and the analytics and everything that we've done in the back to expose those to our stakeholders. So that's how I kind of see it, is geospatial is a much bigger umbrella, which includes the way you think, the way you apply technology to solve problems, and also the way you communicate those results to end users. So it's not just the the software or the tool. It's everything from the tools to the thinking to communication of the results.
Where in that, if we call that sort of a geospatial value chain, for instance, it's complex. It's really complex. It's complicated. And there's different skill sets required along that journey as well, of that sort of broader value chain. How do you see that working seamlessly within an organization or a team to bring together those cross-functional skills to allow yourself to go from collection of good quality data at the onset of a project and or sourcing that data through to the disseminated outcomes at the end, at actual behavior change ideally. At the end of the day, decisions should lead to some behavior change most of the time. Where do you see that getting hooked up and stuck and bottlenecked on that sort of journey typically, if we think about lots of the experience over the last 5 years?
So in a geospatial value chain, like I said, you need different skill sets, like data and management of data and data quality itself is such a massive domain that it requires a whole set of skill sets to do a good quality job or do a good quality piece of work in the data management space. Same thing applies for development as well. A full stack developer who has come from a development background is going to have a lot more in-depth knowledge about good quality development, but might not have enough knowledge about geospatial techniques and technology. Whereas a geospatial person coming in might have a lot of knowledge about geospatial, but might not have the depth in development itself. So where I see the bottlenecks happening is a geospatial person is kind of involved across the entire value chain, but because he's missing that depth in knowledge in each one of those sectors, it leads to kind of either compromise in quality, either in the development space or in the analytical space or in the data space, because that one particular individual doesn't have the depth of knowledge in all of those different sectors. Or in other bigger organizations where you have cross-functional teams, there's usually a delay in transfer of information, because you might have a cross-functional team with very high-quality developers, high-quality analysts and researchers, but how that information gets transferred between these different teams ends up in a bottleneck, because each of these individual person doesn't have the geospatial knowledge. So if a geospatial data analyst provides a data set to a developer, the developer doesn't have the know-how or the skill set to use that within his application development. So he has to go and learn about geospatial techniques and technologies and how they can incorporate that in development, which obviously leads to delay in time or delay in quality, because just that geospatial knowledge has been so, not siloed, but it's been kind of in the hands of just geospatial people, and it's not been exposed to developers and other domain analysts and domain researchers, that there's a lot of time wasted in, not wasted, I would say, a lot of waste. No, I don't want to say waste, but there's a lot of effort spent in transferring that knowledge between these different team members, right? So if you're a developer, then there's quite a bit of time that the developer has to spend learning about geospatial research techniques and how he or she can fit in within that process and where they can add value. So that's where I find the bottlenecks are, is if you're in the development space, then how do you handle large data sets? How do you handle streaming of data? Yes, there are best practices in development, but those best practices might not apply for geospatial data sets because it's not been considered over the last years. So that's what I find where the bottlenecks are, is in the lack of knowledge between the different cross-functional team members. And
is that a sort of language or translation thing? We're sort of operating with different languages because the language of geospatial is still a bit jargony in a sense. And so we're losing, I guess this is another way to say it, thinking about it as a data scientist, they're taught a lot of methods, statistical methods, all sorts of different machine learning techniques, right, about how to expose value from data. But they're often not taught about geospatial analytical techniques. But really it's just another technique like other statistical modeling techniques.
That's right.
But it just hasn't permeated here. We're starting to see changes. Our local university is now incorporating some geospatial stuff into data science. Fantastic. how do you see that? And even reflecting Saga, our head of AI here.
Yeah.
How do you reflect on his experience? Because he didn't know any geospatial when he first started with us.
Yeah.
And that journey to now be geo-empowered as a geospatial data scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. How do you reflect on all of that?
So from a data scientist point of view, from modeling and analytical point of view, geospatial is just another dimension of data set, right? So just like for any data, you might have a time dimension, you might have an attribute dimension. Geospatial is just another dimension of a data set. Now, time series data or temporal data is pretty well established. It's pretty well known. So there's a lot of people, when they come out of universities, they are aware of time series data and they can understand how to handle it. But because geospatial, again, has been in the hands of just geospatial people, other researchers and scientists have not been exposed to that. So when I started working with Saga, who's head of AI, and when he first came in and was not aware of geospatial, and I started working with him, we started understanding how geospatial is just another dimension, and how we can start incorporating it into our regular kind of data science models as well. The knowledge is out there. It's just not very well, I guess, exposed. And I think analysts and researchers, they have to go out of their way to find how to deal with geospatial data. And in my experience, what I've noticed is there's a lot of great analysts who do great work in modeling, but because they're not aware of these geospatial techniques, they're not able to take advantage of those techniques within their modeling. And the minute I kind of show them or kind of lead them and give them a few resources where they can go look into, they immediately pick it up and they can start using it. So it's just a matter of, I guess, an education piece,
knowledge sharing,
and the ability for people to find this more easily. Right now, people don't even know, like, for example, geospatial interpolation methods exist. So if you don't even know something exists, how do you even know how to look for it? It's like Googling. If you don't know what to Google for, it's there, but if you don't know how to Google it, then you're never going to find it.
Yeah.
So that's where we are with geospatial, I think, is the knowledge is out there. There are people out there who know how to do this, but it's just not very well advertised or very well exposed or very well shared. I don't know why that is. It might be because geospatial might find risk. If they start exposing these techniques to everybody, then they might find a bit.
Well, it's interesting, right?
I don't want to say that.
No, it's good. I mean, we hear around the traps this whole GIS is special thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it shouldn't be special.
No.
It should be a core technique that's thought about in other business processes.
Yeah.
And used every day to help solve problems in business. And, it's interesting. I don't know if it's special because we as GIS professionals want to keep it special because we feel threatened, or is it software licensing that keeps it locked up, or is it just so complicated that it just makes it hard? But, other complicated things are being democratized.
Yep.
Right? And I really believe to solve some of the big challenges this century, these decades,
yep,
geospatial is at the core of it. We're talking about geography, right? So I guess if we should flip to that conversation, what does the broader, discipline of geography mean?
Yep.
And we've got this GIS and we've got geospatial tools, techniques, methodologies, but really, to me, and being a geographer, it's how do we use and optimize use of physical resources on planet Earth,
yep,
with the human and social interaction on top, and how do we understand that,
yep,
and then optimize and make better decisions going forward.
Yep.
How does that roll up in your mind? Is
That's
the core overarching discipline?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because this is something that we tackled. We were trying to tackle this even at a university when we were there. When I was in the university, I was kind of involved with research, but the other half of my job was also teaching and building kind of course material. And one of the things that we noticed was GIS was just being taught in the geography department, right? And we used to get students from biology, from architecture, from business, from landscape architecture, from civil engineering, all coming and taking these courses. And one of the hard things that we found was, a lot of GIS, geospatial is IT related. It's a lot of coding, it's a lot of computers, which is kind of hard for, I can't expect a biologist to just start coding immediately, right? Or I can't expect a civil engineer to be a computer scientist to be able to develop these models. So one of the things that we started kind of advocating for within the university was to start teaching spatial within their own disciplines. So instead of sending biology students to the geography department to learn geospatial, why don't we bring GIS to you? So why don't you have a GIS course within biology or within engineering, and you apply geospatial to your problems? Because it's really hard for, and this isn't a university example, but I think this applies otherwise as well in other organizations, because in most organizations you have a GIS team. The organization might be doing work in forestry, might be doing work in insurance, might be doing work in utilities, but you will still have a GIS team. And the GIS team just knows the GIS things. They don't know about forestry, they don't know about utilities. So it becomes a challenge, and what ends up happening is these GIS kind of teams just end up being help desk support, right? They don't actually use the power of geospatial to solve a problem. They just end up managing data sets or managing workflows as BAU. And so the way to kind of, for the broader discipline, I think the way forward is to start incorporating geospatial into other disciplines, not keep geospatial as a separate entity and trying to shimmy problems into spatial, take spatial to the problem, you know? So like, for example, right now, like time series data is now ubiquitous. No matter you pick any software, everybody's capturing timestamps. So if you're capturing timestamps, you can do all sorts of time series analysis. Any software can do that. And the same way in the future, if you start collecting locations against everything and it's stored, then any other software can then pick it up and start doing spatial analysis, right? So right now, and we're slowly seeing that happen. It's not as common yet. Like, even if I take an example of Excel, you know, there's a lot of functions within Excel that come out of the box to deal with time series. I can do date manipulation. I can do time manipulation within Excel. Spatial manipulation, not quite there yet. And even if it's there, it's probably some extra add-in or plug-in that somebody has developed, and it's not really tested. And if it's tested and it's proven, then it's probably really expensive to bring in. So that, and now slowly over the last maybe 10 years, the open source world has really opened up to this, and they've taken the concept of geospatial and now they're developing plugins for every other software out there. So now, no matter what kind of any big enterprise software that you pick has a geospatial plugin or an add-in to it, which is where the world, I think, is going, is instead of having one software that does geospatial, you just bring geospatial to everything that you do on a day-to-day basis, and you kind of incorporate that as your regular day-to-day flow.
Yeah, I sort of talk about the concept of the internet's just ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And no one would think about doing business without internet connectivity.
Yeah.
And same thing when we're talking about data and manipulation. Geospatial should just be a first-class citizen and thinking, I've got these techniques that can leverage and find cool value and insight in this data, just like temporal modeling, for instance, and other statistical modeling, regression. It doesn't matter what it is, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you know, how do we do that? I guess at the moment, if we think about that classic geospatial team, do we need to reinvent ourselves as a discipline? So start to become the thought leaders as geographers, as a core discipline. We're really good at holistically thinking about the whole problem, right, and the whole solution. And actually acknowledging that, and there's so much value in that visionary aspect of being able to piece together a solution from disparate data and problem statements. And owning that and actually leading the development of projects, solutions, outcomes, and not trying to be all things to all people, not trying to hold on to, we do mapping, that's all we do, we want to keep doing it, we don't want the engineers to do it. And it just reminds me of one of the big engineering agencies here, where they've got a big geospatial team and lots of software, lots of licenses, lots of data. And the hundreds of engineers, they don't get access to it. It's phenomenal, and they're stuck back on spreadsheets. Or shadow IT stars, because they can download XYZ QGIS or open source packages and get the job done. But all of a sudden you've got stuff happening on C drives, and from a governance perspective, yikes, scary. So I don't know, what's your view on that? We should become sort of knowledge sharing and driving and empowering the rest of the team, rather than sort of holding on to geospatial processes? Where does that fit in your world, or how do you reflect on that?
I think from a geographer's point of view, geography obviously is a domain of studying what happens on top of the earth, and everything happens on top of the earth at some time, at some location. So as geographers, I think we should always be kind of pushing the boundaries on how do we think about global problems, or how do you think about problems in a geographic context. That's one thing. The other thing we have to also push the boundary on is to understand that these are just tools. That is, softwares and libraries and codes and everything. Those are just tools in your toolkit. It's about how do we use the right toolkit in the right problem space to solve the problem. So it's not about just, having one piece of software, or right now when you use the word GIS or geospatial, people just think about it as a tool, as a computer software or a technology. Whereas my dream or the ideal state would be geospatial is not just a tool or a technique, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of approaching a particular problem. And as GIS professionals or as geospatial people, we should be advocating for that. We should be advocating for having spatial technologies embedded as part of the business workflows, and thinking about how, whatever tools that people are using to do their jobs, how do we bring spatial to them? And then the whole idea of governance and empowering non-geospatial people using GIS is to bring GIS to the tools that they're already using. The biggest barrier to entry for GIS, I feel, is the tool. Is the software itself is so complex, that the ideas and the concepts of geospatial is so complex, or not complex, people are not aware of it, so they find it complex. And on top of that, the software itself is complex. So not only do you have the concepts being complex, on top of that you have to learn the software, how to use it, which makes it which is frankly a turn-off, right? Whereas if there are engineers and scientists and analysts who are already familiar with the tools that they're using, then as geospatial people, we should be bringing geospatial thinking to their tools. And right now we are living in the 21st century where everything is cloud native and everything can be managed in the cloud. All of the governance and all of the security and performance headaches that have already been taken off by the big players like AWS and Google, and these guys are already tackling these big problems on how to manage security and governance at a higher level. So why not leverage that and start embedding geospatial technologies into those existing workflows already that people are already using currently. So that's the way I feel where we can be powerful is geospatial people are now bringing geospatial thinking to other disciplines and educating and helping other discipline folks to understand how to incorporate geospatial within there, and not to, hold on to the knowledge, share the knowledge, and
I mean, it's interesting that sharing of the knowledge. I think as an industry, that's how the flywheel gets started, or as a discipline. At the moment, so many execs don't understand what this GIS thing is or the geospatial thing is, right?
Yeah.
So we need that knowledge sharing piece to them.
Yep.
They'll go, oh man, that's what it means for me in my role. I can now plan health facilities or locations of schools or where to put the next solar farm, right?
Yep.
With objective data and analytics. If we can bring them in on the journey, surely they're going to be able to ask us better questions, which go, oh man, that's interesting. We can answer that. We can actually solve that and empower that with geospatial. So you're sort of getting that loop going.
That's right.
It's not just the technical bits either.
Yeah. And it's also, it's also about, when I talk about that education piece or bringing them on the journey piece, it's also about when you said, you've got these different personas, right? So you've got like the execs who want to understand what does geospatial mean for them. And then you've got other analysts who want to know what does geospatial mean to them. So it's about also, when somebody is engaging with a geospatial person, is to bring them along the journey. So if I'm a geospatial person and I'm talking to an executive, then like you said, I'll be explaining to him how geospatial can be used to solve these big, wide problems for him. Whereas if I'm talking to a more technical person, such as a developer or an analyst, then I can tell him, we should be talking about how applying geospatial within their current modeling can help improve their model results or can help improve their insights or help get them more insights that they might not have thought of, which then eventually ends up being a better result for the executive as well, which means their modeling and their predictions get better as well. So it's about when a particular persona is trying to solve a problem, it's about engaging at that point and saying, how can Geospatial help you with that particular part of the journey or part of the workflow or part of the problem-solving approach. And so at different sectors or not, at different, at different phases of a workflow, we can introduce Geospatial and kind of show them the power of that instead of just keeping that as a separate process or a separate thing. It's about embedding it into their day-to-day world.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Just thinking about that. We're talking a lot about geospatial data.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data out there that doesn't have an X, Y, or it hasn't got a coordinate yet, right? But we can empower that often, right? Geo-enrich that data. So if you're thinking about a business, maybe a CRM, a customer database, whatever it might be, you know, the power of being able to then map all that and then all of a sudden sort of layer it together and join the CRM to the weather forecast data and, I don't know, the traffic on the roads around it. You know, that concept of geospatial as the glue, as the common reference system in a sense. Yeah, what do you see there, and why is it so stifled so often? I mean, so often we go into an organization and partner with them, and we're like, why is this not happening? And they've got a geospatial team often, an investment. And for some reason, something's been lost in translation, and they haven't geo-enriched a very pertinent workflow. What are some of the impediments there? What are you coming across all the time that stop that happening?
So what ends up, and again, this is probably the more traditional kind of workforce management, I guess, because you've got like the CRM, in the CRM example, for example, the CRM tool set is probably handled by the customer relationship or the sales team or somebody like that. And usually they're not engaging the GIS team. And if they're engaging the GIS team, then the GIS team either is already overloaded with their current day-to-day jobs, so they don't have the time or the space to innovate. Secondly, the sales team or the team that's using the CRM tools don't have the knowledge, again, don't have the knowledge of how they can convert those addresses into some kind of a location and then overlay that with some weather data. Or the fact that that's even possible is not known. So if you don't even know what's possible, how do you even go about addressing that? And the only way for you to know that's possible is for you to engage somebody in geospatial, right? But again, it's probably not the geospatial person's job or description to sit there and educate somebody about what they can do or what they cannot do.
Is it because, again, we're not, and this is not just geospatial problem, but a general data problem, we're not automating workflow enough. So often we're still doing a lot of manual work, right? So this GIS team you're talking about, they're fundamentally there to create and manage the data. You know, make sure the data's up to date. Which means they don't have the headspace, the time, because we all know they want to do more. Whenever you talk to them, they're like, I wish we could do that analysis. I wish we could do X, Y, and Z. So again, does it actually come back to like fundamental digital transformation processes and culture within some organizations about we're not modernizing our workflow, we're not leveraging the cloud automation, so we're not freeing our teams up to actually think or have the time to think, to innovate. Would that be, which means they also don't have the time to knowledge share and maybe work with the sales team? What do you see there?
I mean, right now, again, like, you know, we are living in the 21st century. A lot of these automation pains should be taken off of their hands, because you know, somebody who has a really high skill set in understanding spatial statistics and spatial analysis should not be sitting there worrying about, is this data going to get updated, you know, on a timely basis, because that should be a solved problem. It shouldn't be a big problem in today's world, because we have a lot of technology right now that can handle all of that. So I think one of the things is modernizing. So it's not necessarily about upgrading, it's about actually modernizing the way of thinking. So if you look at a lot of financial tools, for example, nowadays, they're all cloud-based, right? So for example, I can take an example of, let's say, Xero, or you take an example of any of the banking applications, it's, banking, which is such a complex concept, it pretty much drives everything about our lives, it's got our money, it's got our savings, it's got our investments, and we just let that go by just logging in and pushing a few buttons. When that can be so easy, why is just keeping a roads layer updated so painful? It shouldn't be. And so where I see that is the spatial team, or just teams generally, and I'm seeing that nowadays, the more the newer graduates, the new workforce coming out of universities are more tech savvy. They are a lot more technically advanced, I would say. So even, I would say like 20 years ago, if you knew how to use Microsoft Word, then you would be on a pretty high paycheck. But right now, if you don't know Microsoft Word, you probably won't get a job, right? So that's the world we live in. And I think in 15, or not, it's happening right now, but even in the near future, in 5 years maybe, all of your biologists and ecologists coming out, they will come out with knowledge of geospatial. They will know that geospatial is possible. And you're in today's world, you're not going to attract these kind of talents if they have to come there and keep their data up to date, because they want to be doing more challenging problems. They want to be solving challenging problems. So yeah, and the tools are available out there. We can sit there and automate and set up the security and performance for all of their BAU processes. It just requires a little bit of investment and a bit of thinking, but it's doable. And I think people should be focused on solving higher challenging problems rather than still spending time in keeping their data up to date.
We've talked about, you sort of touched on there, the banking experience or whatnot. Often I sort of talk about, the consumer tech banking experiences, Uber, Airbnb, Google Maps. But enterprise tools generally just aren't there.
No.
And the expectation now of we are still customers of all that other stuff, as well as working somewhere, that expectation of why isn't work just like Google Maps or Uber? That frictionless experience to get the outcome you're after. So if we think about developer experiences, kind of, and trying to bring, I guess, value to a broad audience, set of customers, set of stakeholders, how do you see them interconnecting? Because it's easy now to bring in an API and slap in a mapping base into an application. It's still quite hard to go, beyond the point I can collect on that. I actually want to do some buffers or some interpretive analysis or spatial stuff. It's still really difficult.
Yeah.
Why is that? Where do you see that dev experience, which is kind of the last mile of the value of the geospatial product chain?
Yeah.
Where do you see that coming? How do we as geospatial community help there?
So currently, there's a lot of like proprietary software available out there that kind of provide those kind of resource bases for developers to go in and build the applications. But that's again a very small subset. That's again people who know about geospatial and who have kind of invested into a particular system or a particular software, and then they're getting support to do development on that. But if you are just a normal, not a spatial developer, just a normal developer, then there's not a lot of there's a lot of tools and technology out there, but the exposure of that is missing. So what would be really beneficial is to have some kind of a platform or something like that where a developer can just go in and can still continue building the apps or building solutions that they currently build, but along with that have the ability to incorporate spatial functions without actually having to know how to implement them. So what do I mean by that? So for example, a app developer might know that I might want to click on a map and I want to find the nearest restaurants where I've clicked, right? Now that is from a GIS point of view, which is a simple tool where you click and you make a buffer and you select all the points within that particular buffer. But for a developer, he doesn't care about knowing or having the best method to find the nearest restaurants, and he just wants to find the nearest restaurants, right? So all he needs is some kind of an API where he just gives it a location and it just comes back with all of the restaurants. So wouldn't it be nice just to have a platform where they can just go in and provide it a location and give it some other data sets that they want, maybe restaurants, maybe bars, maybe event locations, and they just turn that on and they just get that as an API, and they can continue building their apps without having to be bogged down about where do I go get restaurant data, where do I go get my roads data, and where do I actually create the buffer, how do I store that information. I know all of that could be abstracted, because all of that is a solved problem. There are tools and technology out there that's already solved that and providing you a rich experience to build your apps. What's missing is taking that to the developers' hands and for them to build their apps. So in my kind of ideal world, what would be nice is to have a collection of all of these spatial libraries and spatial functions available as endpoints with some nice documentation and some nice kind of journey walkthroughs. So if a developer wants to build an app, here's how you would go about doing it. If an analyst wants to incorporate geospatial techniques into his analysis, then we can just provide them with the functions that they want to interact with, and they should be able to just plug it into their current workflow. A biologist should not have to worry about what is the best interpolation method for spatial interpolation. That's not his or her job. Their job is to look at migration patterns of birds, or that's what their focus is. And so as geospatial community and as geospatial people, we should be allowing and creating tools and technology to enable that in their day-to-day work, not having them come to us to solve that problem for them, because that is intrinsically not scalable. Because if you always need a man in the middle to solve that geospatial problem, then that intrinsically is not scalable, because it's always dependent upon one person or a collective of people. And so you will never, that knowledge or that information will never reach the wider audience if you keep holding on to that information. So it's about enabling all of these different people working in different industries, different sectors, is enabling them and giving them and taking geospatial to them rather than them coming to geospatial.
What I reflect on it all the time. This world we live in with climate change, all of the stuff, the second order effects of all of it. We're seeing it all around us all the time. It's such a geospatial problem, a geography problem. It's kind of the digital twin of the planet in a sense, right? Which is what we can build with Landsat products and other stuff, in different angles and different views. But to me, it's lost at the storytelling side. We're not, the data's there. There's more coming all the time. There's so much data, and I feel like behavior change isn't changing of how humans, governments, societies using our scarce resource and the impact on the planet, because it's not being made real to them. And I guess it's just a statement really, but that dichotomy I have of when you put a map in front of someone, what's the first thing they do? Zoom to their house. It's the way they bring context to often quite complex data, and they understand it intrinsically straight away if the map's well designed. Yet further down that pipe, somehow it's been lost in translation. Like somehow we're not putting enough mapping products or putting geospatial results, analysis into the world, that it's not telling the right story to the right people. It's not driving the behavior change. I don't know. It's just, I find it weird that there's this dichotomy of maps mean so much to people, but geospatial GIS techniques, technologies, data that produce maps, it's lost on most people.
That's a pretty good observation, because I've kind of had similar observations in the past, and having worked in universities, pretty visible there. A lot of this research, especially in the climate change world, is quite academic, and there's and not just in the climate research world, even in food, agriculture, water, environment, utilities, business, all of these. A lot of the research happens, it's very academic, so they would publish a paper on it, they would make some maps, and that map will get made into a PDF and will sit in a publication, and then some news article or somebody might pick up that publication and make an article about it. It's a small map that you see. And the problem is, because academics are there for pushing the boundary on knowledge, so they are constantly trying to solve the hardest problem. But once the problem is solved in an academic sense, it's not getting put into practice in an applicable fashion. So there's a lot of good research that's happening, that's sitting on shelves in libraries and JSTOR and other repositories out there, but that research is actually not reaching the public because it's not the academics' intention to change the world, right? I mean, it's like, you know, I make an example of, let's say, you know, Edison. He was interested in inventing the bulb, but he wasn't really interested in selling a lot of it, right? And so he really understood the value of the bulb, but he was not able to understand why it's actually useful to a lot of people. And then it had to be manufactured and mass produced, and then a business model put around it for it to be actually be sellable and useful and have utility for the public. So in the same way, a lot of geospatial research happens in the research and academic world, and it just sits within that academic community. And you know, most public don't want to go and read reams and reams of PDF documents to understand climate research. And if you look at news articles, they are like 5-minute, 10-minute sound bites, and they'll just sensationalize the result or some controversial or non-controversial items of a paper, and then that just becomes a sound bite in just a social consciousness, and nobody actually goes in and investigates the details. And to do that, right now, the only way to do it is to go and read PDF documents and pages and pages of paper. There is not a lot of good visualization applications or tools out there to actually take that to the public, right?
I mean, think how much is lost, right? So you talked about PDF, there's a map in it.
Yeah.
You may be looking at, I don't know, the increase of temperature across the globe over the next 100 years.
Yeah.
Imagine the richness of data behind that.
Yeah.
Science, analysis, and yet we get a 4x6 inch picture of the entire globe, and that's what you see as a consumer of that information, of that research. I mean, I just feel like so much is left on the table. It blows my mind. But again, if we come back, that's the challenge, I think. We have to be all of what we've discussed today and change the view of what it means to be a geographer, a geospatial guy, a GIS person. But we have to become storytellers. It's on us to make it relevant. People say GIS is special. Well, no, it shouldn't be. We shouldn't keep it special.
No.
And how do we make it relevant to the others?
That's right.
And it's scary. You couple the trends of all this data that exists in enterprise and coming at us all the time, how little of it's being used, and value isn't being realized, coupled with just amazing research that's happening everywhere, but it sits on a dusty shelf. And none of it matters. If there's an alien sitting above us, they go, what on earth is going on? They have to apply all that stuff, link the research to the data, and then they'll understand how to move together in harmony with the planet.
And I mean, and right now, I mean, we're living in a world where, we've got games like, what is that, Pokemon Go and stuff.
Roblox, my kids are.
And kids are now beginning to code and build applications at the age of 8 or 10. So why is it difficult for academics to just make a simple, useful map that any public can go in and start using it? There's a couple of caveats there, I think. One of them is part of geospatial is also a bit of an art, right? I mean, it's not pure science. There's a bit of an art to geography as well. That's why it's not a science, it is an art. Because you have to be able to put different pieces of information together to tell a narrative, and that is the point of an artist, is to tell a narrative. And geographers intrinsically are narrators. That's what they do, is they study what's happening around the world and they tell a story of what's happening. And traditionally they've just written a paper about it. Now there are tools and technology to make interactive narrations out there, right? And that's where we need to be pushing the bar, is geographers should be advocating for more engaged narratives rather than just, and think about it, like 500 years ago when Mercator came out with his first map of, I think it was London, and it had all the street art around each of the city and the suburbs. That was the first street map, and that was the best way, and the amount of engagement he got from people of understanding how London actually looks was so rich and was so popular. What has happened, and that is a true geographer, is how he's able to explain the entire environment on an artistic medium. and be able to tell that story, you know, and that's what I think is getting lost nowadays with the geospatial people or the geospatial kind of workforce, is they're so bogged down in just the day-to-day of keeping data up to date and the IT issues and managing security. They're not able to actually apply that side of their skill of cartography and storytelling to engage users. And that's the other thing that I think where geographers can help is, you know, again, as part of knowledge sharing and education with researchers and scientists and app developers about how do they actually tell a story. You know, an app developer might be really good in making a really beautiful looking app, but if you can't tell a story with the data, then that's where I think geographers should come in and kind of push the boundary there of how narratives can be said using map.
I mean, we see both ways, right? You're touching on that, but you can have an amazing application, amazing UI, UX, it's really engaging, but the rubbish, the data's rubbish. Well, we look at it and go, what? Like, how did you come up with that result? What's the analysis process? What were your input data? Vice versa, you have amazing science happen, amazing results, amazing algorithms being put together, models being built, but then it's shared in a PDF. So again, we've got to join forces and we've got to think about that as a sort of geospatial product sort of data chain, value chain, and going, it's not done until it's done. And we have to understand the full end-to-end process and understand the audiences at the other end and just try and connect the dots all the way through. And back to the academic stuff, I mean, I think, you know, they're often trying to do stuff that will have an outsized impact on the world, but the incentive model of education systems, I think, has a lot that needs to be improved. They're having to chase funding all the time at a project level, a bit like what happens here sometimes is the project ends, we have to move on to the next one. Same thing for them. And so it lands, the deliverable that's asked is the report, and then they're on to trying to bid for the next funding to start the next project. And so I think there just needs to be a full shake-up of all of this, and just that better understanding of how academia and industry and community can seamlessly play better together. Look, this has been an awesome session, Santosh. I guess to end it, what are you excited about? What's the sort of one thing that you think, as a geographer, as a geospatial practitioner, what are you excited about in terms of what you're doing, where we're going, where the world's going?
So what I'm truly excited about is, I think the newer generation, the newer workforce that's coming out, I think is a lot more technically aware, technically awakened. So I'm really excited to kind of build products and solutions that takes geospatial to the hands of these practitioners. And that's where I find myself really, that's what excites me the most, is how can I, if every day, if I can help one person learn and understand geospatial better, I think I'll sleep well that night. So that's kind of what drives me.
Hey, look, amazing. Thanks for your insights, your conversations, your stories today. And we'll see you around the office.
Sounds good. Thanks, great.
Thanks, Santosh.